Mr. Natoli.
Yeah, if I could, thank you, Mr. Chair, just offer some comments, observations. I have a question I want to pose in just a moment, but maybe just this last question about agricultural support. I wanted to point out that you saw the list that was circulated here that the Delta Protection Commission did take this up at its meeting in January as related to requesting the consideration of the analysis of the alternative, this outline here, the portfolio alternative, and that in the course of our discussion at the Commission, it actually there was a split vote to fairly represent that. But in the end, it was 3 members of Board of Supervisors from 3 respective counties that are represented on the Commission, as well as 2 folks from reclamation districts who are actually, one being a farmer in the South Delta, the other being a farmer in the North Delta, again reflecting, I think, the thought that, and everybody weighed in their own perspective, but that a comprehensive approach, again, such as this, ought to be analyzed in the course of the consideration is as large and impactful as the BDCP is, and so therefore the Commission, again, not taking a position in support of the portfolio, but in supporting the request that this be analyzed along with other alternatives that are under consideration. And I would just say that I think from certainly hearing from some of the local folks at both the Commission, but also obviously in some of the other forums in which folks are commenting on BDCP and our planning process and other related activities, that there really is, I think, a concern that some of the approaches are much more singular in their focus, and that if in fact you're really looking at addressing issues that relate to a wide variety of interests and trying to deal obviously with the co-equal goals and recognize the importance of the Delta certainly as a community and what it brings to the conversation, that looking at storage, looking at conservation, certainly levee improvements, and I think it's worthy of note too that at the Commission level that this whole discussion about the habitat footprint, again, it still has to be analyzed, but that in the economic sustainability plan that the Commission put forth some months ago, and certainly this body has received that information, it was noted that a sustainable conversion of agricultural land over time was in the realm of some 25 to 27,000 acres, recognizing that there would be higher value crops and some habitat restoration that would occur over time. And so this portfolio, for example, offers up the number of 40,000 acres of conservation habitat conversion. It gets much closer to the number, much closer than 113,000 or 80,000 or some of those other numbers. And so I think that was another consideration, at least some members of the Commission in looking at this as an alternative to be analyzed, certainly took that into consideration. My question, I guess, is to our staff, either to Chris or Chris, is that as the role of this council, certainly with BDCP, is it something that this body can make the request as a part of our commenting to actually request that this alternative be analyzed in the BDCP process? Is that an appropriate comment for this body to consider making to those that are doing the BDCP analysis?
Yeah, whether or not it's appropriate is up to you. I think that, as you know, this body has determined that it would make a strong recommendation that BDCP be completed successfully by a date certain, and that we wouldn't get into the details. And I think we've highlighted on several occasions what the various roles are with respect to this body, and one of those is a consultative role. DWR is required to consult with you as well as with the Independent Science Board with regard to the preparation of the BDCP, the actual plan itself. So, the nature of that consultative role I leave to the policymakers. With regard to the responsible agency role, we haven't yet seen the draft EIR that'll come out shortly, and we're going to be commenting on that as well, and then about the appellate role. So I think from a policy standpoint, you've decided not to weigh in with regard to a regulatory policy on conveyance yet, Randy mentioned the recommendations we have with regard to storage that we have in the plan, and I think we've taken a comprehensive approach. You'll recall in the Delta Reform Act, we're required to promote new conveyance and storage as part of the overall package of achieving the co-equal goals, and so that's the approach that you've taken to date. But yes, we do have a consultative role as well.
So Chris, just let me, again, without getting too bundled up in this, as a part of our consultative role, when presentations such as today come before us, it could be of different nature, but what's before us, then in that consultation, recognizing that it's an ongoing process with EDCP, that with the Delta Plan as it relates to certainly the context of discussions not only about habitat restoration, obviously conveyance, but water conservation, reduced reliance on the Delta, Delta as a place, all levees, their importance both to flood protection, protection of life and property, certainly to the agricultural and recreational interests in the Delta, all those things. Then for this body, again, I'm trying to put anybody in a box here. I'm just trying to understand that for us as a council to make a request to BDCP to say that, as a part of their range of things they're looking at, to have this included in the analysis, recognizing that, people may say that's going to delay it for some reason or whatever, but and then that would be our intent, is to delay, but certainly to have that comprehensive analysis of items that pieces may be included in the current analysis as people characterize it, but not in such a way as this portfolio or some other proposal. So I guess I heard you said that we can consult, but can we offer we've made other comments to things that they've undertaken or not, and I guess I'm just curious. So we could. Is the answer yes? We could.
Well, I don't think you're legally precluded from offering suggestions with regard to BDCP. Okay. In fact, I think we laid out in one of the appendices to the Delta Plan our thinking about conveyance and whether or not we would engage in a regulatory fashion or not, given the fact that BDCP is ongoing. But keep in mind that, again, for purposes of possible incorporation into the Delta Plan, the Delta Reform Act lays out statutory criteria that the BDCP has to successfully follow, one of which, not most importantly, but it has to be permitted under the NCCP Act, also has to comply with CEQA, plus those comprehensive criteria that are set out, including, as Dan pointed out in his staff report, the reasonable range of conveyance alternatives, also reasonable range of other operational criteria to recover fish and identifying the water that's left over for export. So it's in the statute. You're going to have you do have a possible appellate role if it ever gets to that. Fish and Game's going to have, Fish and Wildlife will have to make the first determination. But ultimately, there's a lot of smart people working on BDCP right now. They're going to come out with a document that we haven't yet seen. You do have a consultative role, which means you can offer suggestions. To date, we have not gotten into that level of detail.
And I might weigh in too. I think, as Councilmember Frierini has alluded to, if we look at the Delta Plan as a comprehensive solution to the Delta problems, and the BDCP becoming an element of the Delta Plan if it's successfully approved, we have already laid out through other recommendations of the plan and some policies that encourage them, initiatives to improve storage, to improve local water supplies and use them more wisely, to improve efficiency, to improve levees in the Delta, including the levees that protect the conveyance of fresh water south to the pumps. So much of the proposal that's embedded in this alternative is already part of the Delta Plan. In fact, while it's great that Congressman Miller has endorsed the idea of additional conveyance.
I'm studying
additional conveyance. This might be the first time that the NRDC and the Bay Institute and the Planning Conservation League have endorsed the ideas that are in the Delta Plan in terms of these particular initiatives. So the additional elements then that are in the BDCP, conveyance, additional habitat restoration, and then the operational criteria that make that system work to satisfy the fish agencies, are what come out of the BDCP, and if it's approved, they dock into our plan. So there is an overall comprehensive program that is being developed, through the whole Delta Plan process. Now, in the comments that have been previously provided on behalf of the council, we have emphasized, as we said, the importance of studying a reasonable range of alternatives in terms of sizing a conveyance. And I don't know if I recall Jerry's, Dr. Merrill's conversation this morning. I think he said that one of the sizes that they're looking at is about in line with what's being proposed here. On terms of this is an NCCP, so it has to meet the approval of the fishery agencies. And so one of the things that as an EIR they would be not required to do is study an alternative that didn't meet the project's objectives. And so a project that's to be worth studying, it's got to meet the fishery agency's objectives. And so there's a judgment to be made there whether reduced habitat restoration is actually going to meet the project objectives or not.
Dan, let me ask though then, but if the council were the mind to simply state to look at this alternative, which has several, a number of moving parts, and again, it may have a fatal flaw, as, I think even the presenters have said that they have some concerns about certain aspects of it, but that this comprehensive approach, a lot of it, falling back to things we've already thought through and talked about in the Delta Plan, maybe not tying them all together with the same thread, nonetheless, their elements are there, and you've spoken to them, so did Randy. But a simple statement as to, take a look at this. It's a proposal. It has, elements that folks may or may not consider viable, but certainly they're included in one context or the other, Delta Plan and some of the current BDCP analysis, but not tied together or bundled in a portfolio the way this particular proposal is. And there may be other proposals out there, but I guess before the BDCP, I guess my concern is before this BDCP process gets to a point where people begin to really draw those hard lines in the sand, and some of those lines have already been drawn, but is that you've got something here that seems to have some level of support, popular support in the sense that there are elements that folks may dislike and may like, but are willing to at least say, you folks take a look at this. You folks that are doing this, obviously there are costs associated. There's some time involved with that. Is that, from what you just said, though, a simple statement? Would that be in concurrent with what we're doing here?
I think before we could advise you on that, I'd want to understand more what I thought the BDCP agency's responsibilities were to study the conveyance and conservation and the storage and conservation and other elements that are outside of the current, what I understand to be the current program of conveyance, operations, habitat restoration. I don't know the range of things in which they're doing. Certainly they have to understand, can their operations meet their objectives given the range of facilities that they hope to work with? But I think we'd want to understand that better before we advised you on that. It's worth remembering, again, Mr. Grindstaff's letter from last spring talked about the importance of studying a reasonable range of conveyance alternatives. We certainly have serious actors who are saying, hey, this seems reasonable to us. And so I think, it would be interesting to look, if we don't ask now, to look at when the draft EIR comes out and see, how closely does it evaluate alternatives that are similar to this. I think in addition, another thing that Joe talked about when he wrote that letter was the importance of considering the potential to phase the construction of the conveyance facilities too, which was a controversial suggestion at the time. And we've heard today, well, maybe an approach would be to do two tunnels sequentially as opposed to do both of them at the same time. And so in some ways there's some elements of this suggestion that the council has already said you ought to look at this. Now whether it's whether that truly is reasonable, whether it really meets the objectives of the BDCP agencies in a way that they ought to be required to study it, that's a thing I don't think I know enough about how they've approached this yet to be able to say, yeah, that would be a reasonable request or not. Certainly it would delay their action. And as we've all talked about, it's the importance of moving ahead to solve the crisis that the legislature has identified, is always on our minds.
I would add that I think it's important for us to add value to this process, given the fact that the BDCP is scheduled to be out within a couple of weeks. It would be prudent for us to read that and find out what's in it before we react. And then I think Dan's suggestion that we evaluate the context of this proposal with the responsibilities of BDCP is also appropriate and would frame our suggestion to them, I think, more carefully if we were to make one.
Mr.